Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Techie Surgeon. I don't expect a ton of people to be on live this morning. I had to do this at 6:45 just because that's when my kids are still asleep on the weekend. And I've got a lot going on the rest of the day. For those of you who have not watched my Substack Live before or subscribed to the Techie Surgeon, I'm Dr. Christian Payan. I'm a board-certified orthopedic trauma surgeon in Durham, North Carolina. I'm the author of Techie Surgeon, which is a newsletter that focuses on the intersection of health policy, clinical AI, and technology. I also am core faculty at the Duke Margolis Institute for Health Policy and a surgeon there. The last hat I wear is I am CEO and co-founder of Revel AI Health, a AI care management platform that helps hospitals and health systems with value-based care models. Today, I thought that what I would do is hop on my watchpad for a little bit. I promise I won't be on it the whole time. And compare ChatGPT for clinicians to DoxGPT and OpenEvidence. These are three of, in my opinion, really leading medical answering platforms. Um, we're calling it a clinical AI showdown. I wouldn't necessarily characterize it this way. I think that they all have their pros and cons. And the most important thing is that, especially the clinicians, the audience, just try to use these tools more and help all of us find the best way to use them and see where they fit in the pathways of delivering clinical care. Quick housekeeping. I mentioned some of my affiliations. I don't have any financial relationships with any of these companies. All of the opinions that are expressed today, the views are mine and mine only. And I selected these tools because to me it looks like they are getting the most traction in the marketplace. ChatGPT for clinicians is probably a bit of an anomaly. I'm showing you that tool because it was just announced. It's got a lot of hype around it, obviously. And I want to see what OpenAI is doing in this space. There's many other tools. So several companies and people reached out to me and they said, hey, if you're going to compare DoxGPT and OpenEvidence, you gotta get up to date expert AI in there. You have to, show what Glass Health does, or our tool has outperformed OpenEvidence when we ask clinicians. There's too many for me to try them all out. These were the ones that, and I have tried many of the ones that you see on the screen as well. They're all good, but I wanted to use the ones that I'm most familiar with and that it looks like are getting the most penetration in the market, or at least have the potential to get the most penetration in the market. A couple other notes. This is not something that is on the fringe, right? Lots of clinicians are using this. Over 100 million encounters or clinical questions have been asked on OpenEvidence. And depending on who you ask, maybe 40% of clinicians are using some of these tools. And I think that that's probably an underestimate. I like this quote. It's not mine, actually. A friend mentioned this. Hold strong convictions loosely. Like I love Claude Cowork, but the pendulum is always swinging. Tomorrow, Codex 5.5 may be better than Claude. OpenEvidence and DoxGPT are like in a head-to-head race, right? The features are going to continue to evolve. I would say that for those of you who are looking to use these tools in your life, you can't just corner yourself into one. I know some of you have reached out to me saying, I got everything on Gemini. Do I really need to switch? I think you just need to be familiar and willing to experiment with the different platforms, as long as it's providing value to you. Because even me as a super user on Claude, I use other tools. And I think that you're going to see in the presentation and as I start demoing these platforms, why it's good to be willing to switch between these different tools. All right. The way that I thought I would do this is at the top of the show, instead of waiting until the end, I thought that I would give you my overall impressions of the three tools, and then I'll jump into live demos and considerations for how I use these tools and see how they performed in the way that I decided to evaluate them. ChatGPT for clinicians created a lot of hype when it was first announced just a few days ago. As soon as I saw the announcement, went on, got verified as a clinician. First off, just to describe that process, it was pretty interesting. I do think that they had a reasonably high bar for getting verified compared to other platforms. I had to enter my NPI, my national provider identity. I had to get a picture of my driver's license front and back, and then I had to do like a little face recognition clear ID thing before it gave me access. Um, I think that it's a very promising tool, and the reason that it's promising, the same way that it would be very promising if Anthropic decided to release one of these tools, is the potential for multimodal output. You'll see later, the way that I use these tools is I'll ask a question or I'll start to dive into a topic, and I'll take the output from OpenEvidence or Doximity GPT or UpToDate Expert AI, et cetera, and then I will convert it into something else, a visual that can help my patients understand a condition or a presentation, which I'll show you as well. ChatGPT has an advantage here because they're the native platform for multimodal communication. So that's pretty interesting. They did embed skills into the interface, which I'll show. That honestly, right now, at least when I tried it, felt more like just baked in prompts. But the idea that you could use a skill, a true skill, the way that some of you may be familiar with in Claude, where you have a workflow, an answer being converted to an Excel sheet, the Excel sheet also showing you an interactive HTML. Like that's very promising because becomes a one-stop shop. There was cited clinical search available. You'll see that it's not as comprehensive, in my opinion, just um, as it when it comes to answering questions as OpenEvidence and DoxGPT was. It's free. All these tools are free. Good luck penetrating the marketplace now with the medical answering tool, honestly. Doximity GPT. For those of you who are clinicians um, on the show here today, you're probably familiar with Doximity. You probably use it to make massed calls to your patients. They've got a nice telehealth platform. They've been a news network for clinicians for a long time, and hundreds of thousands of clinicians use Doximity. DoxGPT, I found to be actually the best when it came to my standard queries. The way that it puts its output towards you is very easy to read. It's structured in a really nice way. And they have some other really interesting facets to their platform. They have peer check, which now allows for physician experts to basically weigh in and have their answers to questions, have the answers to questions graded by them. I think that's really nice. In general, both Doximity and OpenEvidence, I think, have been very physician forward. Doximity kind of leads the pack here. They've got great relationship with the physician community. And again, I at least found that the clinical intelligence on routine queries were the best of the three. And that can change. And you may have a different opinion. I hope you do. And that all of you try these tools, because that's the most important thing, I think, in today's live talk is you go use them, please. um, I think that the other unique thing about Doximity GPT is that for administrative purposes, creating a prior authorization letter, patient instructions, the embedded CME is easier than OpenEvidence. I think that the telehealth tools are better on Doximity GPT. There's like this, I think, I call it clinical convergence. If you start to look at all of these tools, they are increasingly looking the same. They all have got a scribe now that they want you to use. Uh, OpenEvidence has a dialer straight up. For those of you who are clinicians, you know the Doximity dialer, right? They named it the same. And Abridge, for example, has an embedded clinical answering tool, which, by the way, I've used, and I have some comments on that as well. So they all start to look the same. And that goes back to this reality that you have to find the tool that fits best for your workflow and that you really like. Having said that, the Doximity Scribe and the Doximity Dialer are just better, in my opinion, right now than the competing tools, at least on OpenEvidence when we're comparing these three. That's not to say that OpenEvidence won't get better at those tools. Of course, when it comes to an ambient scribe, the best ones are embedded in your EHR. So maybe that's a moot point. OpenEvidence is like the all-arounder, in my opinion. I think that the real differentiator with OpenEvidence, besides its ease of use and how deep they've gone on the clinical answering, is the content and Deep Consult. And I want to show a live demo of Deep Consult. I think that a lot of physicians are completely unaware of this feature when it comes to OpenEvidence. And this kind of goes back to my point. I don't just use these to answer a question one-off. I will need to present a uh, discussion to the quality improvement committee around DBT prophylaxis. I need a really comprehensive background report on that, right? Maybe I'm looking at the cost effectiveness of robotic surgery. We can do that one live today. Um, Deep Consult's really great because it will come up with a beautiful research grade paper with embedded figures, citations, and for me, it's been the most comprehensive clinical answering tool from that perspective when you select Deep Consult. It can be a little much if you're just looking for these for day to day to answer challenging questions or to put together, an after visit summary, et cetera. But I think that that's a real differentiator uh, for open evidence. They don't have all of the community aspect of Doximity, um, but in some ways that gives them an advantage because I found that it's so important to have little friction when launching these tools. And this is like one area where actually EHR integration, I think, could be weirdly a bit of a barrier. So I mentioned that Bridge has got this embedded clinical answering tool, and some other platforms as well are embedded in your EHR. I have tried using them, and I find myself going back to the mobile application on my phone because it's just easier. And as long as you have a business associate agreement in place with the mobile application providing the answers, then it's just easier. So that was pretty interesting to me. I think that this has the lowest friction use. It's for many people on par, if not better, when it comes to clinical answering. The Deep Consult is, I think, a really nice feature. So here's a side by side on one page. When you look at these three tools, ChatGPT for Clinicians is obviously super new. I did not find the clinical answer quality to be very good. It does have cited search. There's a deep research mode, but I didn't really tap into it in the limited time I had. I think there's a lot of promise with skills. And my critique of all of these is I think that they're building for the clinician that's not very techy. They just assume that in the moment we're, not going to be facile with generative AI, and that's changing. Like, I wish that these tools had an MCP or an API. And I will give Glass Health a shout out. They make their tool available by API, which is nice. I get that it's not consistent with the business model of these platforms, especially Doximity GPT and OpenEvidence. They want you to spend time in their tool, but that would unleash a lot of potential for multimodal output. And so in that category, ChatGPT wins, right? Because they're a native foundational model that allows you very quickly to take the output, make a very compelling image, make a PowerPoint, maybe a data visualization. None of those outputs are as good, in my opinion, as they are on Anthropic's Claude tool. So, Claude, if you're out there, maybe you consider entering the race. From a workflow breadth perspective, I think Doximity is probably more familiar to most of us, but OpenEvidence actually has the lowest ease of use, and the friction is really low. On latency, and this might be because I use the thinking mode on ChatGPT, it's like kind of slow, as opposed to Doximity GPT and OpenEvidence that were faster. And OpenEvidence is like super fast. You can tell that they're throwing a lot of money at their compute. They're all free. So I think that, when distribution beats product, if you're entering this space, it's tough. Okay, so now let's actually use them. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to try to have a couple of live queries.